for kids who experience ADHD, if we remember what's going on in their brain, TV and screen time it's actually designed to give them a dopamine hit, right? And so it actually keeps them in these reward loops. Yeah. So it's like they just want more and more. And so we know kids with ADHD, their brains may naturally produce that kind of lower dopamine. And so we do see them engaging in that dopamine seeking behavior. And so they will constantly want that next hit. And so the screen time actually provides that.
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents. This is Dana Kay here with another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. Today, we're diving into a topic that so many parents grapple with, including myself in my household. That is screen time. Whether it's video games, social media, or even streaming television shows. I mean, screens are an unavoidable part of our children's life. But how much is too much? And more importantly, how does screen time impact children with ADHD? So to help us unpack this, we're welcoming back a frequent flyer. I love a frequent guest and a trusted expert, Ashley Gobeil. Ashley is a regular on this show. She's a therapist with over 15 years of experience and a wealth of knowledge in child and adolescent mental health, family dynamics, developmental trauma. And she works extensively with children diagnosed with ADHD, ODD, and learning difficulties, making her really uniquely equipped to tackle this important subject. And today, Ashley is going to help us explore the connection between screen time and ADHD and really offering us practical tips for parents to manage technology while supporting their child's emotional and mental well-being. Hi, Ashley. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Hello. Thank you. Hello, listeners. Yeah, I'm excited to be back, especially with this topic. This has been a hot topic in all of the parenting coaching spaces I've been in.
I bet. And I don't think it's going anywhere. I really don't. And I think that, we've got to, our life is changing and we've got to change with it. And we're not going to get rid of it. So look, let's start with that big picture. What are some of the key ways screen time impacts children, especially those with ADHD?
So I guess it feels really important as well to start, Dana, is that, I'm going to be sharing lots of my thoughts and tips and ideas around screen time and ADHD and children in general, but specific of, how it impacts ADHD. And for parents listening and caregivers, it's so important that you, come to a really informed decision and ultimately what feels good for you and what aligns with your parenting values and your comfort level, because there's not really a one size fits all. It'll be around, okay, what's going to work for my family? And also how do we take into account, what's going on for your children?
I think that is a great way to start the episode for sure.
Yeah. So what are the impacts of screen time? So for many kids, it's basically a temporary kind of escape, a focus, a plug-in. And I know my little one, but, kids I work with as well. Do you ever see them in front of the TV or the video game? They literally are like plugged in, and sometimes you can't even, you have to say their name 30 times before they'll pay attention. So they can get really absorbed in it. And why I'm mentioning this is for kids who experience ADHD, in particular, if it's that exacerbated ADHD symptoms and they are struggling, kids can use the screen time as a way to almost like an external regulator. It's a way that they're trying to regulate themselves so they can get really hyper-focused in it. And unfortunately, we know it doesn't increase their internal regulation. And so it can be a way for them to actually avoid what's going on internally. They kind of disconnect. Like, I guess that's what I'm saying. It's like they can disconnect from themselves and the world around them and get really absorbed in the video game, in the TV show, whatever they are watching. And for kids who experience ADHD, if we remember what's going on in their brain, TV and screen time it's actually designed to give them a dopamine hit, right? And so it actually keeps them in these reward loops. Yeah. So it's like they just want more and more. And so we know kids with ADHD, their brains may naturally produce that kind of lower dopamine. And so we do see them engaging in that dopamine seeking behavior. And so they will constantly want that next hit. And so the screen time actually provides that. And you would see it in the work you do with families, Donna, how they will seek that like pleasure food, right? And they want that dopamine hit from the sugar, or screen times gives the same impact on the brain. So that can be quite, I guess, an adverse impact over time, because it can keep them in those dopamine loop hits. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like sugar, the more that you have, the more that you want, but also the more that the brain needs. The brain, dopamine receptors in the brain are designed in a way to they want to have a healthy balance. The brain wants that healthy balance. And so if there's too much dopamine, it actually down regulates the dopamine receptors in the brain, because they're like, oh, okay, I've got too much dopamine. I need to turn off the receptors in the brain. And so obviously then the body's like, well, I need more dopamine. Now.
Yes. So like I said, it keeps them in that loop, right? And as you said, like the more they have, the more they want. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to speak more to this, but ultimately screen times, TV shows, especially kids' TV, like animation, games, it's actually designed to keep them wanting more. Yeah. Like remembering from a marketing perspective, like there's stuff behind the scenes, like it keeps them wanting more. And it actually can really overstimulate children's brains, in particular the ADHD kiddos. So it can create a lot of overstimulation, which is why a lot of parents will see that overstimulation after screen time, and the dysregulation can actually increase. What I find really interesting is that screen time, especially too much, but it actually decreases impulsivity control, the ability to control urges. So for a kid with ADHD, right, if you think about impulsivity being a really tricky symptom, screen time will actually exacerbate that, and it decreases their capacity to control impulses.
Which is what parents that have kids that have impulse control do not want.
Yeah, right? Because it activates that high reward, as we were saying, dopamine part of the brain. And it's a bit of a disaster for kids who are struggling with ADHD, it just exacerbates those symptoms. So there was some research I came across that found screen time to basically be very similar to junk food seeking behaviors.
That is so funny that you say that. My husband calls TikTok junk food for the brain. So there you go.
Yeah. So it's like thinking about what, that screen time is doing and how it is exacerbating those ADHD behaviors. But I also really want to acknowledge parents listening, and you mentioned it at the beginning, Dana, I so get, we live in this world where there's lots of tech, but I also get how screen time is a break for us. I've been there. We live in this world as well where we have less family and social support around us when we're raising children. Parents are often both working for financial reasons. So it's sometimes that screen time and your kid being in front of it, because they're also really highly motivated by screen time. So it's it can get them to do things. It gives you that parenting break, and it is the easy parenting fix. It's okay, we can get them occupied. I can get stuff done. I can cook dinner without hearing my name 50 times. So it's I so get why we also do it, right?
Yeah, and I do it. and you do it, Ashley. And so, this episode is not about us calling out saying you shouldn't be doing that. Like we all do it. And especially with a child with ADHD, it's so overwhelming, and you do need that break. You need that break extra. And so, yeah, totally acknowledge that. And, we all do it.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, you can see why we get there. As I said, especially if we're experiencing that burnout and overwhelm, which I'm going to speak to as well. So the other impact around screen time is in particular for like the younger the child is as well, but it actually inhibits their natural play and it kind of squashes that imagination development. It keeps them out of creativity. So it's like it creates less space or decreases the space for them to build those skills on independent play. In using their imagination and actually wiring the parts of the brain. It's actually the right brain that we want them to wire, right? And come on to development. It's actually that part of the brain is how children learn to process emotions. It's how they integrate their experiences and make sense of life around them. It's how they develop their emotional regulation over time. And so if you think about screen time actually inhibits that part of the brain wiring on because it doesn't give them enough time to, be outside of the screen to play. So there is some really interesting research that talks about how screen time, especially early on, like I think the recommendation now is under 2 is like no screen, unless it's like FaceTime with family and it's that kind of reciprocal, that kind of back and forth facial expression that they're picking up on. So it's like they're saying no screen time under 2. And then I think it's like from 2 to 7. I read the other day, it was like they're recommending like 30 minutes, which feels like nothing, right? For our kids and sometimes for us who want that break. But the younger children are and the more screen time they're having, it's actually wiring up the left part of the brain more, like it's bringing it online sooner than it should. And as I said, we actually want children to be spending more time wiring up that imagination, the play, the emotion centers of the brain.
And it's so important. And it's funny that you were talking about this. I was interviewing someone for the podcast not too long ago, and, he was touching on that topic as well, that, our kids are missing out on this imaginative play. And so these kids going into school environments and they're not knowing how to socialize, which is then teachers are like, this kid has ADHD or this kid is emotionally dysregulated. They're not able to sit still because when they're at home, they're on their devices as well. So they're not getting out into the world, doing all of that exercise, but also learning how to tackle social situations happens in that environment where they're out of the house, when they're out with other kids. Our parents used to send us out for hours at a time. And if we had a beef with another child, we just had to deal with it. And we dealt with it outside, and then we'd come home before dark, and we would
cold. Like I was like, I grew up in Canada. It was like winter or summer. You were outside. You just went and played with the neighborhood kids. Absolutely. You know what's really interesting, Donna, is that right part of the brain that I'm talking about, that we want them to spend more time wiring and growing and exercising, to build. It's actually in charge of social development, emotional development. It's actually also linked to immunity. And the body's ability to reduce inflammation, digest food. So it's connected to the gut. Like it's really interesting to think about, but if they're on so much screen time, starts to become a deficit. I don't love using that word, but like underdeveloped parts of the brain that we need to manage inflammation, our immunity, and self-regulation to come online.
Which a lot of these things, our kiddos with ADHD are struggling with. And so, while I say, said at the beginning that, look, it's here to stay, we've got to adapt, I think that's what the focus has got to be. We have to adapt as a society. School has not changed for decades. And so the way that school's set out is with the thought that these kids are out spending hours and hours at end outside playing. But now they're not because of technology. And so the school environment needs to adapt. You know, our home environment needs to adapt. It's here to stay, so we need to adapt. Sorry, I was going on a little bit of a rant there, but I think it is super important to, you know, really put it out there. I think that we as a society need to adapt because it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And I guess it's like, adapt in like what's considered healthy, but also not getting drawn into that, I don't know, narrative, like not getting drawn into the fact that thinking that we need screen times for everything. Like,
we don't.
Like I've got, you know, it's fascinating. I've got friends who are teachers who they're saying even in kindergarten and year one, Donna, there's barely any toys in the classroom anymore, and everything is done on the smartboard or individual iPads. So it's like, what kind of adaptation is that? It's really interesting. It doesn't match the research around what do children at these ages need. We know they need enough. You know, it's kind of maybe it's thinking about like what is enough playtime? What isn't enough outside? So it's thinking about, okay, if they're getting that time outside and the play and, wiring up those parts of the brain we know they need, okay. And then it's like, okay, they get a little bit of screen time. And we want to get children to a place where when we ask them to turn off the screen or there is a limit and boundary, which we're going to speak to, that they can do that somewhat regulated. Yeah, because they're not going to love it. But it's without what, you know, a lot of the parents that I'm working with in the program saying that they're getting their kiddos to turn off screen time and their children will fly into complete fits of rage or, you know, trash something and damage something or having full meltdowns for hours or, you know, 20 minutes. It's really full on response as opposed to giving them that screen time and then building up that enough regulation where they can go, okay, I can accept that boundary or that limit because, my parent is doing the best they can to keep me healthy, happy, and grow. Yeah. You know, and
so you've shared a lot of things that, ways that screen time impacts our children, especially those with ADHD. You know, we're talking about that as such, you know, it is a big part of this modern life. But, you know, what options do parents have to really manage it in a way, you know, that supports their child's emotional and mental health?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, it's really helpful to remember that screen time is designed to never feel like enough. You know, so it leaves kids wanting more. Yeah. I don't know if people are familiar with Dr. Becky, love her work. And she actually recommends, why don't we explain to kids how screen time can leave our bodies, brains, and feelings like we want more and more? So and that self-awareness, which really aligns with, you know, our ADHD specific parenting we do in our program, is bringing our children's awareness to how they might be feeling and what's going on in their body. So it's like actually explaining to them that actually that screen time is going to feel like you want more and more. And it's going to feel like, you know, a bucket that you just can't quite fill. You know, it's got a hole in it. And it's just going to want you leaving more and more. So there are going to be times where, you're not going to feel really happy when I ask you to stop it. So, you know, kind of really explaining what it does to our brain. I've been doing with my little one because we've been definitely trying to reduce it in our household as well. And even at 3, I'm explaining that too much TV is actually not good for our little brains. And it is my job as the adult to keep you, you know, healthy and safe and growing. And it might not feel fair when I set those limits, you know. In terms of like thinking about, okay, what are some of the options around screen times? And we've been talking about this in a lot of parent coaching spaces is ultimately parents get to choose, you know. So it's like you choose, kids don't choose. But as I said, what's one family is going to choose over another family might look different. So we've got some parents who are looking at how do I actually get rid of it completely because my kids are just not coping and we actually need a detox for a little bit of time and then reintroduce it when they've gone through, you know, the program, or they've gone through, whatever they need to in order to reduce that inflammation, and their kids have more space to make decisions around screen time or be scaffolded to make decisions. So, and usually I recommend really reducing screen time for kids who are just not coping. And that's the kiddos who, whether it be 10 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, that when they're asked or that limit is set, they're the kids who are like wanting to throw the TV across the room. Like they go into big aggression. And I mean, I'm sure, Donna, you would have spoken to parents who experience this with their kids in our programs. It's like, those are the kiddos who are just really not doing okay. Other things we look at is like, do you do 30 minutes or, 45 minutes or 1 hour each day during the week? And then parents are saying, okay, and then none on the weekend. Or the opposite, Monday to Thursday, there's no screen times. And then on the weekends, there's some screen time. And again, it usually is around what that parent's routine looks like, what's the extracurricular activities look like. So it's kind of thinking about what's going to fit. Again, that recommendation, like under 7, I think is 30 minutes if you want to follow those guidelines. And I do say that sweet spot is anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. I notice in kids after an hour, the dysregulation starts to increase when you get them to
and I think that's also like not just our kids with ADHD as well. Like it's across the board with all kids. We've always sort of tried different things like what you're suggesting. We during the week or on the weekend, sometimes really to cut the cord, we've done times where we've just done no digital screens for a week just to detox that out and then start again with, say, 30 minutes. And so sometimes that detox period is needed, and it's actually quite interesting to watch what happens because, they're going to get worse for the first couple of days, but then, wow, the change in their demeanor is.
Yeah, that's a really great point on it. It's like it may feel really hard and it may get worse for that first few days or the first week or even 2 weeks sometimes because the big meltdown around not having it. But actually it will save parents time in the long run. Because if you think about what it's doing to the ADHD brain and kiddos' brains in general, that if you can do those detox and if you can reduce screen and wean them off over time, it's going to create more space for regulation for them in run. So it's like, yes, the intense meltdowns at the beginning, but you'll get to a place where there'll be much less. And it's okay for kids to be bored. They might not like it. It's like, how can we be with them in the board and start to retrain their imagination to come online again? So it's like, we're simply not having screen time. So there is going to be some boredom that they have to feel. And I think I've talked about this in the podcast before. Kids who are struggling with ADHD, being bored can feel like a really scary place for their nervous system. It's like there's dysregulation happening internally. And so when they're not constantly distracted or chasing that dopamine hit and they have to kind of be with what's happening in their body, they want to run from it. Yeah. Definitely. One thing that I am mindful of is another tip is I really encourage parents to also explore and look at what their kids are watching and playing. Because that also has an impact.
Very true.
Right?
Yes.
What they watch is really important. There are so many big themes happening in even TV shows and games. And for, little kids, remembering they need to process their emotions and behaviors. And so even if they watch something on TV, they actually need to process it in real life because it's very hard for them to separate out, So kids who, I often see kids in my therapy room who will like play out TV shows, characters, because they've been so absorbed in this online space. And so usually that's a sign of like, there's probably too much TV happening and that I'm able to separate out. Yeah. I mean, I'm really mindful as well. You would know teenagers, and you said we are in this world that, a connection to phone, screen time, or some form of connection to their friends, social, it's really important for them, So it's like, we can hold the boundaries on what this looks like, but we also want to be mindful that in this day and age, it's how they connect. And we don't want them to feel too isolated in adolescence as well. Like it's such a tricky space to navigate.
It definitely is. And, this is how they socialize. I remember back in the day, I would be out with my friends all the time. And I think that the teenage years has changed so much. When I walk into my son's room sometimes, we're constantly on with someone, and I don't even realize that they're there. And then they're in the background. Oh, hi, Dana, I'm like, oh God. So I've got to really be careful of like what I say when I walk into my son's room. But let's just go to, you said you talked about those boundaries, setting the boundaries, I think, around screen time. It can feel like that constant battle. Do you have any sort of practical strategies that parents can really use in the day-to-day life in setting those boundaries and sticking to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, some of the don'ts I would say around setting boundaries is don't expect kids to be able to turn off the screen and then be able to regulate themselves. Like, let's hold some realistic expectations. Yeah. So
a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, don't expect them to be able to do it yet. Yeah. And they will often need connection from us and some body movement afterwards to kind of dispel that pent up energy that's in the nervous system. Another don't around setting limits and boundaries, don't use screen times as a reward system or behavior, bargaining tool, or a consequence around behavior, because that's just going to continue to exacerbate those ADHD symptoms. It's like the reward loop, the dopamine hit. It's like, yes, I'll comply with the behavior because I want my screen time. And so it doesn't actually develop that true self-regulation. Yeah. And it doesn't kind of scaffold the skills they need. Actually, it's kind of just like, oh, I'll do compliance for a reward. Yeah. So I really want to encourage you to stay away from that. And I think getting really clear on what you as a parent are willing to do around screen times and start to share that with your kids. Have a family meeting, sit down. Hey, your other parent and I, we've been thinking about what we're going to be doing with screens, and we're going to be doing TV and screens a little bit different in our family now. And this is going to change, and this is what it's going to look like. And explaining what's going to change, how it's going to change, why it's going to change. And also letting your kids know that as you're the parent, you're allowed to pivot at any time. Mm-hmm. So you get to change, as you said, a bit of trial and error. So it's like, this is what we're going to try for a little while and see what works. And we kind of reserve the right as your parent to change that in a couple of weeks if it's not working. And that might feel really tough, you get to kind of choose the boundary again if it doesn't work and change it to something new. And it's thinking about us as it's our job to hold really sturdy boundaries and limits while our children are growing, and expect that kids will and they do react to those limits and boundaries. And our role is just to hold space for their emotional experience of the limit and the boundary. Yeah.
I love that.
So, many of you might be thinking, okay, but like, how do I do the meltdowns when I turn off the screen time? Like, how do I actually set a boundary? And I often encourage parents to go first, really look at your burnout levels, where your stress levels are at, and what's the state of your nervous system as a parent. It is really tricky to put in boundaries when you feel like you're kind of already on edge most of the time. Like even for listeners right now, if you tune into your body right now, and if I said to you, hey, can you get your kid to have no screen time for the whole next week? Like, what would that feel like? Does panic set in? Is there please? It's like, oh, I'm not going to get a break. Like, what happens for you when you even start to think about the reality of putting in boundaries? A really awesome tip I've heard, I'm going to quote Dr. Becky again, talk about around screen times is practice boundary setting in all other areas with your kids. And that can be like a way to really build some confidence. So it'll be things like saying no to the cookie and the ice cream before dinner. It's saying no to particular snacks. It's explaining that you're not willing to buy them that toy. So it would be like, hey, I can hear you really, really want that toy because, we're at the shops. I'm not able to buy you that today. I'm choosing not to buy that for you today. Like practicing holding those limits and boundaries in other ways. And I know for a lot of the parents we work with, when they're in stress and burnout, setting boundaries all the time, it's really tricky and exhausting. And it's like often trying to keep the peace. So where can you kind of practice? And then when, even holding that limit around how long we're at the playground for, how long you're going to be out playing with your friends, and really clearly communicating that to your kiddo. And then when you start to feel confident, play with the screen time one and really be clear with kids. Okay. Kids really, really need it spelled out. So it's like, hey, you're going to have screen time for, instead of even saying 30 minutes, 1 hour, for TV, we usually do get to watch one episode. So you get to be really good. You get to watch one episode from start to finish, or you get to watch 2 episodes. Or with your game, it's like, I've got a timer on. You can play that game for 45 minutes. I'll let you know when time is up, and then I'll come and switch it off, or you can switch it off, and I'm going to pop our iPad away. And as I said, anticipate that might be a meltdown, there might be an outburst. And so let them know in the moment. And, actually seeing your kiddo, it's going to feel really hard when I ask you to turn this off in a few minutes. Remember, it brings up really big angry feelings for you when we've had to shut off your game before. Yeah. So I just want you to prepare for that big feeling to come up, but I'm going to be here with you in that big feeling. And it might feel really unfair. Everyone else in your school gets more than you.
Everyone in the world gets to stay up till midnight.
Yeah. Talking to your friends. I'm the worst parent because I'm the only one that has rules. And it's funny because you can bring in some playfulness with that, right? And can sometimes take the intensity out. But, if you think about, if I summarize some of that, is expect that they're not going to be able to do it on their own. Really be clear around the boundary when you've decided, what that is. Explain to them what's going to change, how it's going to change. And that, you're in charge and this is what it looks like. Breaking it down, how much time, and then anticipating and verbalizing what feelings they might have. Reminding them, remember, screen time is there to make you feel like it's never enough. So when that 45 minutes is up, your whole body's going to want more. Yeah. And remember, you get that tightness in your chest, or you get clenched fists and you get really frustrated, And so again, that process in itself is building their emotional intelligence, and it's building emotional awareness of the body. And you can also really plan around, how do you have alternative things to do? They're going to need some body movement, some sensory activities, to dispel that energy. Invite them to go outside and jump on the trampoline, lift some heavy items at proprioception, get them in their body sock, wrap them up, get them to go outside and swing. It's kind of thing about, okay, what can be the plan? And I would actually do that before and after screen time, like some body movement if you can, like even 10 minutes. Okay, guys, you go outside for your 15 minutes, half an hour, and then we move into screen time. Like it might be about thinking around the routine as well. So they have somewhere to kind of put that energy after school, then move into screen time. Not sure what you think, but
Ashley, everything that you've been talking about, and just even the words that you've been giving listeners today, I think is absolute gold. I mean, listeners can actually rewind this episode and get a pen and paper and write it down, because word for word, you've just given them the script that they need to use to start implementing. And it really is about that consistency as well. Like in, when you do have that boundary, keep that boundary, because if you don't, the kids it's going to get worse and worse. But Ashley, everything that you've shared today has been fantastic. And I can tell you, I'm going to be using with my little one, not the teenager, but my little one, when it's time to, in our screen time battles. Now, I'm just going to ask you a question. I haven't had you on the podcast since I've implemented this, and I probably should have let you know before we started, but I am now asking every guest this at the end. If you could share just one actionable tip that parents can start using today around this topic, what would that be?
Oh, that is a great question. It's a juicy one. One actionable tip. I would say make a decision. Like it would be get together with your co-parent or if you're solo parenting and just go, what is screen times need to look like in our home for a while? And just get proactive about it. Just start. Start. I think
just
probably
start.
Just start it. Start this journey. It's not always going to be easy. It does mean we have to put a lot of effort in. We've got to ride the wave of those meltdowns. We sometimes have to manage aggression after those meltdowns. It's like, just start. It's tricky, but I promise it will be so worth it in the end. You'll have much more time and space when your kid can be independent playing, bored, be creative. Yeah.
And help them thrive. That was wonderful, Ashley. Let's just get started. Now, I know that you do have a special gift for listeners. Can you please tell them about what it is?
Yeah. So I've created a free guide called Healthy Habits for Digital Kids, Managing ADHD and Screen Time. And it's going to be, it's full of practical tips to help you set those boundaries and create a healthy balance with technology for your child. And it's going to be filled with even more than what we've talked about today. So we want to make sure it's really clear scripts are given to you so you feel really, equipped to do this.
Amazing. I am going to be downloading that myself. We will drop the link to that guide into the show notes below. Ashley, thank you for joining me again today for this such important topic and sharing all of your knowledge on this important and challenging topic.
Thank you for having me.
As always, everyone. I love it. Thank you once again. Now, listeners, I hope today's conversation has given you some practical tools. I think it definitely has. And, like that deeper understanding of how you might be able to navigate that screen time with your child. I think these small changes can have a massive impact. And every step towards balance in your house definitely counts. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to the podcast, share it with someone who might benefit, or leave us a review. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at adhdthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.